and we really wanted to get at, what is going on in the world right now. What is, what is it that's really stirring up so much evil in the world right now? I know that we wanted to talk about, how are demons getting in, and what about grace? What about that supernatural grace? How do we ward off those demons? So maybe you could tell us, I've heard exorcists talk about portals. Right. You can have portals of grace. You can have portals to demons. But there seems like there's a lot of portals open up to demonic activity. You want to speak to that, Father?
Yeah, a portal is just an entryway. It's a way in which you enter into something in some fashion. And so when you're talking about portals of grace, you're actually talking about the means by which grace enters into the world. And the principal ways that those come is through the sacraments. The church has always said that the sacraments are the primary means of ordinary grace for those of us after Christ. And so it's what, people who go to confession on a regular basis, people who receive the Eucharist on a regular basis, they've got all their sacraments. This is one of the principal ways by which they grow in grace. Then, of course, there's the sacramentals of the church. Those are also, and there's different sacramentals. There's the Benedictine holy water. We can get into a little bit of those if you like.
Sure.
And then, of course, there's the private prayer of the individual and the individual's own devotions and things he does like that, which are also means of grace. But I can't stress enough that even in our own work, primarily when people come to us, one of the first things we have to do is get them back on a normal sacramental life, going to confession, going to mass, and just doing a basic elementary regimen of prayer. And a lot of times that clears out most of what we deal with. In fact, when people contact us, they don't see me too often. It's only the people that it becomes clear it's possession. And most of the people that are at the lower levels, most of that just gets cleaned up on its own, just by leading a normal Catholic life.
And that's something.
So, Father, if I can chime in for a second on this. So just to be very clear for the people out there, it is incredibly necessary that we have a regular, consistent prayer life and a regular, consistent sacramental life. And that alone is, you're saying, if I get this correct, it sounds right, is some of our best means to combat evil. Just prayer life and sacramental life. Those are the key root foundational points. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying. And actually the number of people that actually come or show up on your doorstep that actually need the help, a vast majority of them are not doing those things. It's very, very rare that you come across somebody who might have some type of extraordinary diabolic influence and yet they're still leading a normal sacramental life. A lot of that's just because the demons will drive them away from it. But a lot of it is just the lack of leading a Catholic life can be an open door, especially for Catholics who know better that they should be getting to Mass on Sundays and holy days of obligation, or that the types of sin that they're committing is grave matter. They know that, and so a lot of times those are the reasons for it. But if they would just lead a normal Catholic life, that is a standard prayer, a prayer life like saying the Rosary every day and doing meditation or things of that sort, auxilium Christianorum, which we talked about at some point before. But it's also but then the sacraments, primarily receiving the sacraments on a regular basis. The number of people that come to us asking for help, especially when it involves their children, where their children are suffering from difficulties, a vast majority of the time, it's because of the fact that the parents are either leading a life of sin, the father's involved in pornography, or their marriages are not properly, they're not valid marriages. And so they're living in an irregular situation, and they wonder why their children are being attacked. So if they just a lot of times just getting the marriage straightened out, getting the family on a normal prayer life, getting them back to the sacraments, that solves a vast majority of the problems in those cases.
Wow. I've heard it said, and maybe it was you that said it, I might have seen it in a video, but exorcists claim that a good confession is one of the most strongest ways to rid oneself of any demons, oppressions, and things like that. That's true, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Part of it has to do with the nature of the legality of it. So when we commit a sin, we are, in a certain sense, taking ourselves out from underneath God's authority and placing ourselves under the authority of Satan. But also,
Right.
by committing the sin, we are also aligning or allegiing ourselves with him. And there's a certain binding that we're doing. When we commit a sin, we bind ourselves to the agent of sin, which is Satan, to his kingdom.
Oh.
And through that, and so whereas the absolution actually, it absolves, it literally removes the bond of the sin in relationship to the individual, and the demon who is got his foot in the door through the sin. Once that bond is broken, a lot of times that'll even cause cases of possession to break, a lot of obsession, but oppression, you see that quite a bit. Once people finally confess the sins and things like that, a lot of that stuff just clears up.
Father, I can tell you that early in my priesthood, confession wasn't a big deal among most priests. And
Right.
I remember, doing the typical offering it, a half hour before mass on Saturday or something like that. But I've been convicted, thank God, it was several years ago, 15, 20 years ago, that it's absolutely essential. In fact, I feel it's so essential that I made as much accessibility as I could by building confessional in the front entryway of my rectory. And so people will come and, yeah. In fact, you might have heard a little bleep just now. That was someone texting me to ask if I was going to be available for confession tomorrow. But I don't know about you, Father, and correct me if I'm wrong, but as a shepherd of these sheep, I literally panic when I feel like people aren't in that state of grace. Why? Because they're just fodder for the devil. They're just easily manipulated. And so I tell people, when you get in that state of grace, that's when the words that Jesus says, he says, my yoke is easy, my burden light. What do you mean by that? And this is my interpretation, is that, when you're in that state of grace, you when you doing the right thing and stopping from doing the wrong thing, you just use the words, of course I should do this, or of course I should do that. It becomes easy. But when we're not in that state of grace, it's like climbing Mount Everest to pick up a rosary, right?
It very much is. Actually, there's, one of the things that demons can do is they can actually move our emotions and put thoughts in our minds and actually block people from receiving the sacraments. The first time I noticed this, it was an exorcist who was training me, said, if you find that people in your parish, that there's, you're sitting in the confessional and people aren't actually coming to confession, one of the best things that you can do is say a binding prayer or do a minor exorcism over the people in your church or in your parish against any demon that's keeping them from coming to confession. I've taught other priests this, and everybody's experience is the same. Within a minute or two, someone's in the confessional saying, Father, I wasn't going to come to confession, but, and it shows you that they can actually block people from receiving the sacraments. Conversely, obviously that tells you they don't want people receiving the sacraments, because once they do, then they have a certain strength in relationship to the spiritual warfare, which they don't want people to have.
Exactly.
Now, Father,
you could say that. Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but Father, when it comes to us laymen, us lowly laymen who are just kind of hanging out here trying to engage the battle for our families, but when it comes to this, you talk about points of entry or portals of entry for the demonic. How critical is it? I mean, as a spiritual head of my home, even though my kids are all out of the home now, I still pray. I have the authority to pray binding prayers over my children and my wife. Still, do I not? Number one.
Yes, you do. You do.
All right. So
by virtue of the fourth commandment primarily, but it has to do with the natural law, because they, as their father, up until they reach the age of majority, you actually have the right to command your children, but you also therefore have the right to command the demons in relationship to it. Afterwards, because of the nature of the fourth commandments, children are still bound to do the bidding of their parents unless there's sufficient reason to the contrary. That, we have noticed, gives the parents the ability to do binding prayers in relationship to their children. And one of the things that we always watch for is to make sure that people are following the proper authority structure, is if there's any retaliation. So what we've noticed is that parents are rarely retaliated against when they say the binding prayers for their children.
When you say retaliated against, you mean by the demons or in some natural way? Or?
Yes, that's right. So the demons will attack the person very often in the same way they're attacking the child, but they'll attack the parents. Sometimes they'll attack the parents' weaknesses and things of that sort. But we've found that doesn't happen, except for in very rare cases. But generally speaking, the demons know they must obey the authority structure. See, what most people don't realize is that the demons actually have a natural law as well. And St. Thomas parses out the three categories of natural inclination. But in the third category of natural inclination, which is proper to reason in human beings, but in demons, it's proper to, and angels, it's proper to their intellect. And in there, God built into them a structure, just like he did to us, to grasp the binding force of the command of a superior. And so as a result, even in cases of possession, when you're commanding the demons in session, when they hear that and they see that intellectually, that's what drives them and compels them to actually do. And so their will is at variance with that, but eventually they will succumb to what they know is the truth. And so it's the same thing here, is they know that the parents have a right to command the demons not to influence the children.
So then would it be,
go ahead.
Forgive me, Father, I just wanted to finish up with this question then. This is amazing. So to give us husbands and fathers a lot of hope, because in a lot of my work with men out there, men's conferences, parish missions, and so forth, a lot of men will come up and say, well, my kids have grown, they've moved on. I wasn't this way. I'm having a conversion. It's too late for me now. And I will normally tell them it's not too late, because you still have a spiritual authority in this. Is this
That's
accurate?
correct?
Father? That is
Yes,
right.
that's very correct. And they also have to realize too, at this point, it's true that sometimes it feels like I have the same people or the same kinds of observations made by people that, well, my children are out, well, what I do, it's a little bit too late. And actually, no, you still have obligations to your children morally because of the obligations of charity. And so you still have an obligation to say those prayers for your children. You would also have the obligations of counsel, giving your children counsel at times in which they're properly open to it, etc. But that also means that you also have the rights to the spiritual authority over them. And so the demons recognize that. And so it's not too late, and they should continue to pray for their children. And if they haven't, then they must begin praying for them.
And is this the same for mothers as well? They don't have authority over their husbands, but do the mothers have authority over their children along with the father?
Yes, they do, and basically the same reasons. Right now, I'm writing a book on the nature of diabolic influence. It's a little bit out of hand. It's 650 pages. I haven't even gotten to the chapter on possession yet, and it's 22 chapters, and I'm only on chapter 9. So, anyway, the point being is, in there,
what's the cliff notes,
I lay
Father?
out in chapter. Yeah, well, I'm going to put out a lay version, I'm hoping, at some point. But in there, in chapter 4, the whole chapter is dedicated to just the authority structure. And in there, I parse out exactly where parents have the authority and where they don't. And it's very detailed, because there's a lot of misunderstandings about that today, even among exorcists.
Wow.
So,
people are listening right now, Father, and I think they're leaning forward because, they have a spouse or they have a children or child that has wandered away from the faith. And what you're saying here, if they only get back into that simple routine of going to church on days of obligation, and then go regularly to confession, usually that's about once a month. And I would think you would say, have a close relationship with the Blessed Mother, pray the Rosary as often as you can. That alone will turn their faith back toward God, right?
Yes, that's actually true. I think that, and one of the things I often tell parents to do is look at the behavior of your child. I mean, we talked about the portals to demons. Well, the principal portals to demons is mortal sin. Though the mortal sins are the primary things that open up the door. Venial sins don't open up the doors of the diabolic. Now, the demons use them to slowly lead us to mortal sin. But in point in fact, it's mortal sin that is the open door. What most people don't realize is that every time you commit a mortal sin, technically speaking, you've placed yourself under the authority of Satan. And so to become possessed is actually a proper effect of mortal sin. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody who commits mortal sin becomes possessed. But the point being is, and because God is merciful, you've opened the door through mortal sin, but God determines which demons are allowed to step across the threshold. And so we can thank God for his mercy in that respect. But this is one of the things, is to start praying, start saying binding prayers against the particular behavior, like the spirit of pornography or the spirit of impurity or the spirit of rebellion or whatever the case is. When they see that, if they start praying against that in relationship to their children, And then at the same time, ask Our Lady to give the person the grace to come back to the sacraments. Another thing that I'll often recommend that people do, and I first started doing it in relationship to children, to their parents who are dying. I'll tell them, look, it's not just enough that you pray that they receive the grace, because the demons can mess with people psychologically. And so even if they're getting the graces, the actual graces, the demons can thwart that process and get the person to end up not being faithful to the grace by affecting the person emotionally or psychologically. So what you need to do is, one of the things I'll tell them is, bind any demon that's keeping the person from going to confession, or any demon that's keeping the person from receiving the sacraments or for coming back into the church. So if you bind that first, as well as saying the prayers and asking Our Lady for the graces for the individual, a lot of times doing that negative part and the positive part will actually result in their conversion. So this is something which parents can do in relationship with their children. When they see that the children aren't leading the Catholic faith, start saying prayers to blind the demons, against any demon that would keep them, or against the demons that would keep them from coming back into the faith or being open to hear about the faith as well, because they can even affect people's thinking. We call it running commentary, especially with people who are possessed. It doesn't matter what you say to them; they'll hear what you say, but they think something different because of what the demon is putting in their head. And the same thing, I'm sure parents will often say they experience the same thing in a relationship with their children when they talk about the faith. But if they do those things, a lot of times that will slowly but surely open up the child to being receptive to hearing more about the faith, or even going to confession.
Wow. So, Father, this is unbelievably fascinating. We're going to take a break, but when we get back, we're going to ask if you can kind of get real concrete. What are the ways in which we can fortify ourselves? What is the church what has the church given to us? And also, what about our homes? How can we fortify those? So we'll talk about that when we come back.
We're back, everyone. U.S. Grace Force Podcast. Father Richard Heilman, myself, Doug Barry, with our guest tonight, Father Chad Ripperger, exorcist, and just very wise individual. We're really happy that he's on the show with us tonight. Father Ripperger, just again to kind of follow up on the last segment, to be very, very clear for all of us, especially husbands, fathers, mothers, wives, but even priests and anybody who's a leader or in charge, has a spiritual authority that's been given to them. When we are not fulfilling that role, when I'm, for example, not the spiritual head of my home that I'm supposed to be, does that then create a point of entry or a portal of entry for the diabolical by me not standing on the wall and protecting as I should be protecting? Is that accurate? Yes or no?
Yes, it actually is. If you look at the first thing that Satan did with Eve, is to get her to make the choice on her own to step out from out the authority of the husband. So his attack is always on the authority structure in some fashion. This is why masculinity, which we can talk about maybe a little bit later, but masculinity is under such severe attack. But it's also the same thing and then what did Adam do? When he took the fruit from Eve, he capitulated his authority. So that's the undermining of the authority structure was one of the first things that Satan was actually looking for. If the two principal functions of an authority is to provide and to protect. So if the father is not protecting the family spiritually, not just physically and morally, but spiritually by doing the prayers and saying those things and keeping watch over the home, etc. And if the wife doesn't submit to that in a rightly ordered way to that authority, then what happens is that it becomes the segue for the demons to affect the children, because the authority structure has been affected. And so those who are supposed to be protected by the authority structure, namely the wife and the children, are not being protected. So this is one of the principal reasons why in our line of work, one of the things that we'll do is we actually ask them, and in our intake form, to find out exactly what is the family structure really like, because if there's serious disorder, that's got to get straightened out, because if it doesn't, a lot of times you're not going to clean up the problem. So yes, right. If the father doesn't maintain his authority within the home, according to the mind of Christ, obviously treating his bride, his family and his wife like the bride of Christ, etc., as Christ talks about in Ephesians, if he doesn't do that, then the children become actually susceptible. Conversely is also the case. If he is engaging in sin, he's actually mortal sin. He's inviting the demons into the home. And this is one of the reasons why you'll even see this, where the father will be committing, usually it's pornography. That's the thing we run up against the most in relationship with the father and the son. The father will begin using pornography, and then the next thing you know, the child, who is not even being exposed to pornography, starts being barraged with impure thoughts and stuff, and he doesn't even know where it's coming from, and he's perplexed by it. So the point being is the father is in a certain sense the gateway, but he's, because he determines who comes in and who doesn't in relationship to the home, spiritually speaking. But then in addition to keeping the demons out, it's also his place to invite all the angels and the saints in. And so this is one of the reasons why it's the father's place, not the mother's, even though the mother can aid the father in doing it. It's the father's primary obligation to make sure that the prayer life within the family is done properly. It's the father's place to make sure that the children are saying their prayers. And the children need to see the father saying his prayers so that they recognize this is part of justice in relationship to God that any real man would render or do. And also it teaches the girls, this is the type of man that I want to marry. That is the man who's going to be just to God, and therefore he's going to be just to me. So this is, these are the things. So the father is one of the key pivotal things. But this is obviously the reason why the masculinity, especially of fatherhood, is under so much attack. You see it all the time in the news media. You just watch any kind of, even just commercials or something, it's always the wife or the children who are the wise ones, and the father's just this idiot and adult who can't function, do anything properly. Yeah, exactly. So it's the inversion of what actually should be, but it's ultimately just a tearing down of the masculinity and of the fatherhood. But without going too far afield, that's the main reason why the father has to maintain these things, and he himself has to be disciplined, doing his prayers, especially for the protection and for the providence spiritually of the children and the wife.
I believe this is the year of St. Joseph. I've heard a rumor that it's actually going to come next year, but this is the 150th anniversary of St. Joseph being named the patron of the church. And we also see that Father Calloway's book is coming out, Consecration to St. Joseph. So everything seems to be going there. And so we actually set this up tonight, didn't we, Father, that we wanted to talk about, men's role and what's happening to men and how can they become stronger. And we're actually going to unpack this even more in our third segment. But before we do that, I want to hit, I think a lot of people, okay, we have an exorcist, a very knowledgeable exorcist here. And you're talking about portals of demons and all this stuff. What can we do? What are the tools, or I like to say the weapons that the church has handed down to us that can help us to fortify ourselves, but also if we can talk about fortifying our homes.
Yeah, I mean, in military terms, they refer to it as hardening the target, or in a self-defense. I do a lot of self-defense talks, and it's how do you protect yourself? Situational awareness, your head's on a swivel, and you're hardening the target so you become less of the victim. So how do we harden the target, Father, spiritually speaking, for our homes and our lives?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of levels. The first is it's like any other type of military situation too. You're not going to have a decent military without discipline. And that applies even with ourselves internally. You have to have a certain amount of discipline. And what does that mean concretely in the home? It means that the father needs to be encouraging the children to lead a moral life, to do all those things that are proper to a Catholic life, to engage in the various devotions. The father needs to, and the mother needs to, make sure that a consistent prayer life is being done within the home so that right order is actually followed. So in other words, there needs to be an interior discipline in the family. And that has to come ultimately through the father's authority. He can't be overbearing. He can't be difficult, but at the same time, he has to be firm. And yet at the same time, honestly seeking the good of the children, etc. And he can't be seeking his own good, because that's contrary to the nature of authority. So his own discipline and the discipline within the family, and maintaining that will go a long way. The second, and a part of that, of course, is, as we mentioned before, making sure everybody in the family is leading a Catholic, a sacramental life. The second thing is just making use of various sacramentals and devotions. So having Benedict medals in the four corners of the property, make sure the Benedict medals are blessed in the old rite, because they actually have the exorcism that's attached to them. So putting them in the four corners of the property. Sometimes people will put them over their doorstops. and sometimes even over the windows, but I don't think that's so much necessary, although it's to be encouraged if people want to do it. Making use of holy water, the Father from time to time blessing and sprinkling the house with holy water, having it blessed every Epiphany by the priest. You want to make
Right.
sure that the priest comes and does the Epiphany blessing when you move into a new home. As a general recommendation, as a general rule, I always exercise the place, because you never know, even if it's a new house, what the construction people have done. I have a relative who moved into a brand new house, and the people on the construction had done stuff there, and so we're still cleaning up that house spiritually.
Wow.
So exercising it, and then having the priest bless it when you first move in. Also doing the various devotions. One of the principal ways to harden the target is to get into the habit of being under the mantle of Our Lady.
Yes.
She is, without a doubt, she has perfect coercive power over demons. So,
Yep.
and you see this even in session. When she shows up, it's over. There's not even any discussion. The demons don't even talk very much. I mean, they might scream and yell and carry on, of course. But the point being is that having a strong devotion to Our Lady and encouraging that within the family is one of the key ways to protect the family. St. Michael, obviously, having a devotion to St. Michael. There should be a devotion to St. Joseph, because he is, after all, a hammer of demons as well. And it's
Right.
also, and he's also one of the most powerful in relationship to demons. Having a devotion to him, if for no other reason than to asking him for the grace to, to become a good father and a good husband and things of that sort. So I think a lot of it is just a matter of using the various devotions, getting the children to develop devotions to the saints that they might have a natural inclination or a disposition towards. And then, of course, using exorcised oil, if you can find a priest that will actually do it for you, having blessed handles so that the demons of the air are driven out. These are all different ways, which I've talked about in various conferences, but these are all different ways that you can actually fortify the situation at home so that the children are protected, and the wife is protected, and even the husband in a certain sense, because even when he exercises his own authority, God honors that and protects him in that process. Whereas if he's not exercising his proper authority, God's not going to necessarily protect him, usually because he's getting involved in stuff that he shouldn't.
Okay, you just opened up a number of questions for me. I'm just going to try to hit these. Number one, when it comes to the blessing as well, I was told years ago by a priest. He said, make sure that you're blessing your wife and your children every day with holy water. So from that moment, it's been 27 years or so since I was told that. I bless my wife and my kids almost every time I'm in their, almost every day I'm in their presence with holy water. Is number one, is that something we husbands should be doing, fathers and husbands?
Yes, absolutely. They should be doing it on a regular basis, usually before the children go to bed each night and before the husband and the wife go to bed each night.
Okay.
I actually at Easter time in the old rite, they bless the water by adding chrism to it, chrism oil.
Nice.
And I actually save all that because I put it in bottles and I give it to families so that because the parents always love that new chrism smell of their newborn baby, and it's powerful water that I use, and I ask them, bless your children and bless each other with this water.
So, and then follow up on that question too. I like what you said about if you can find a priest who will do it. Well, Father Heilman, you're one of those priests, so get ready to start
that's right.
getting that blessed oil out to people. But then, Father Ripperger, another question. You just to reiterate, you mentioned about blessed candles, burning blessed candles throughout the day, so that because that actually affects the demons in the air. That's correct then?
That's right.
Oh,
that's right. Actually, if you look in Scripture, there's actually, if I remember right, I can't remember how many. It's like in the 20s. There's like 20 references to demons of the air throughout the totality of Scripture in various locations. I might be wrong in that statistic, but there's definitely references to them. And basically what they are is that the demons that can they get into the air through various sins that people commit, etc., but they can influence things within our home. And so the candle, as it's blessed in the old rite, is actually asks, and prayer begets what it signifies. So what you ask for is what you get. So when you pray this in relationship with the candle, and the priest does, and it receives that blessing, it's actually you're asking to drive the demons out of the area by the light of the candle. Wow. So it's actually it actually have a potent effect. Sometimes people will notice this. I I can't quite put my finger on whether it's a natural thing, but I think there's a spiritual component to it as well. And that is, when you walk into a like a crypt or something where there's candles burning everywhere, right? And they're exorcised and blessed candles, and you're there to pray. There's almost there's an ambiance or an aura that you actually have in relationship to this. The last time I noticed it is when I went to the Our Lady Shrine there in Wisconsin. And that's one of the places that I actually noticed it. But if you burn the candles on a regular basis, and sometimes people can't because they have young children or cats or what have you, but if you can burn the candles, that will help significantly.
But you say they should be blessed in the old rite. Is that correct? Is that best?
Yes, because the new rite of blessing doesn't actually contain the same formula. And so again, because what you get is what you ask, what you ask for is what you get. And Christ himself says it, knock and it will be opened, ask and you shall receive. So there's a specific correspondence to what you ask for is what you get. And the same thing is in relationship to prayer. So when these things are in the prayers that the priest is saying in relationship to the particular sacramentals, that's the actual effect that it ends up having, even in spiritual warfare.
Okay.
What do you feel the devil is doing right now? And then maybe too a little bit about what can we do? So can you give us a take on what you believe is going on with the devil right now, Father?
I think he's using people quite a bit. I think that's the principal difficulty that we have. People who are, for lack of a better way of putting it, they're basically in league with him. They actually believe the same things that he does. They want the same goals. I'm not sure if you guys saw it, but I actually did it was like a 40 or 50 part series on communism and how its psychology is identical to diabolic psychology. And I think what we're seeing is there's some stark comparisons that sometimes when I see the behavior of some of these people, that it's what I've seen in session, So, for example, right now things are kind of leading up to a crescendo. And that's what you tend to see right before the person's liberated. So there's this buildup of the diabolic manifestations, which come much more drastic, much more open, much more out there, sometimes even more preternatural right towards the end. And then the person's actually liberated. But you'll see the two characteristics of the diabolic is that. But I think the other thing you're seeing is that once Satan thinks he has the upper hand, he presses it all the more. He doesn't wait. He doesn't take his time. He will in certain circumstances take his time, but once he thinks he has control over a situation, he's going to drive it until he gets ultimately what he wants. I think that ultimately what he's doing is he's using people who are not leading morally good lives themselves. I think that a lot of them, as I mentioned, believe the same thing that he believes. And I think that that's slowly starting to come out. I mean, when you look at some of the stuff that was revealed before the election, and even some of the things that are generally available on the internet, and some of these things are on public record about the behavior of some of the people that have been the most vociferous during this time frame. It reminds me a lot of how the demons themselves would, when they get caught in something, or when their shame is revealed about the sin that they've committed, they sometimes become very vociferous and very angry about it, and try and push the envelope even more. They also do the typical thing. I mean, there's so many comparisons. They do the thing of once their sin is revealed and people see it, then what they'll do is they try and create a distraction in something else. So one of the things that exorcists have to constantly be on the guard about during session is when you start getting a certain point where the demons actually, you're starting to gain certain control over them, or you're starting to get somewhere in a session where it looks like he's going to start telling you some information. He'll actually start doing things in order to distract you, or he'll dig into the person psychologically that's possessed so that it's very hard to get to them. And there's even a stage called the external phase in liberation, in the 6 stages of liberation, where the demons, once they start losing control over the interior battle, which is very similar to what we kind of started to see in this country, where some of the people, call them deep state, call them whatever you want, or even people that are just communists and pushing for communism and things of that sort, once they got into a position of it looked like they were going to slowly get to the point where they were losing control. It was very possible for them to end up losing control. They moved to in cases of possession, they moved to what they call the external phase. That's the stuff you see in movies where things are going around and around and around in the inside the room. Although that's very rare, it actually does do that. Or they'll start like blow out the candles, or they'll blow out the lights, or whatever have you. And it's to distract everybody on the outside once they've started to lose control on the inside. The other thing is, it's very common is claiming that they're victorious, or that they've already won, when they really haven't yet. It hasn't been proven to actually be the case, or that they actually have rights, or that there's certain things that they have that other people, that the other people can't take away from them, etc. So it's very similar to a lot of the things that we're actually seeing. So I think we're seeing that on their side. I think on the side of those who are on the side of the angels, so to speak, who actually want what's best for this country, I think that this is just some basic external observations, and stop me if I'm going on too long.
No,
But
it's great.
I think there is a kind of in the minds of people, there's a feeling of vulnerability right now. And the reason I say vulnerability is because people recognize that the checks and balance system in our country has essentially broken down.
Right.
And the checks and balances meaning that people in one part of the government are just doing whatever they want, or legislating when it's not their place to legislate. We saw that actually with COVID, where you actually had mayors setting aside constitutional rights of the citizens. So the actual checks and balances system are broken down. There's also kind of a slow burn with people, in the sense that people are angry at systemic crime. I mean, people are just certain families and things of that sort, who are just systematically getting away with crime year after year, and nothing's ever done about it. How much evidence do you actually need? I mean, when the public sector knows 10 times more than what people get convicted for in court, you're wondering, like, what's it going to take for certain people to actually end up being put away for their crimes, especially when the crimes have caused tremendous damage, which basically involve treason, selling out the country, and things of that sort. This is also why many believe that even if the fraud is exposed and all of this comes out in this whole process, that some people have actually expressed they're not convinced that the Supreme Court would actually end up ruling in favor of what's right. Now, historically, they've gone both ways. What they did with LBJ, they basically acknowledged that the guy committed fraud, but they still gave him the election. And then you've got the, if I understand my history correctly, and then you've got the Al Gore situation, which they actually did adjudicate appropriately, so it seems. And so I think that there's people that are concerned that there's not going to be a consistent or a reliable judgment, even from the Supreme Court, even with the new people that we have on it. That's just kind of my general take, but I think that demoralization is precisely what you see when demons are attacking people. One of the things that we have to do with people who are possessed is constantly get their focus back on God. Don't let the demons drag your focus into, the stuff that you're suffering and the things that you're dealing with. Keep your focus, because that's when things start going downhill. It's also it's also one of those things that the shift in the focus is what the demons are always trying to get us to do, and to be demoralized. In the ritual, you actually ask for the time and date of departure of the demon. Now, I don't stress that too much, and neither does Father Bamonte, who's in Roman, if I'm not mistaken, and neither did Father Amorth, God, and may he rest in peace. But I found that what they do is they try and set you up like you're going to win, or that this is the day in which the liberation is going to occur. The day comes and goes and it doesn't happen, and so the person gets demoralized. And that's why I always tell them, well, first of all, demons are liars, so never presume that when they tell you those things that it's actually going to happen on that day. If it does, it does. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Our job is just to keep grinding it out. And I think that's my concern is that people on our side, the way the demons are, they're using the people on the other side to attack us and to make us feel demoralized, like they've won, and what I think ultimately on the side of the demons, it's about distracting us from our focus. I think that's what it ultimately boils down to.
Now, Father, early on as you were explaining that, which that was phenomenal, and I just your assessment of the entire situation in comparison to what's happening right now in our country and other parts of the world. But you mentioned something I want to just touch base on again, is that they get angry, that there's a reaction from the demons when we respond to God's grace and start to rise up in prayer and so forth. I mean,
Right.
can you kind of detail that a bit more about that we are in the thick of a battle, that it's not like they're inanimate kind of robotic beings that are tempting us, but there's an actual, if I'm understanding this intelligence, there's a response to them that's coming from them, and they get more angry when we rise up in unity of prayer and so forth. Is that correct? Am I getting that right?
Yeah, it is. And there's two parts to the St. Thomas defines anger as a complex passion in which there's perception of injury with a desire for vindication. Now, one of the things, and this is what we've actually seen in certain segments of our population, like in the mainstream media and the like, they take everything personal. Everything is personal. That's the way demons function. Literally, you can't have any interchange with them. They don't take personally. And that basically boils down to the fact that it was kind of interesting because on the communism series that I did on YouTube, they one woman says, well, it sounds to me like they suffer from narcissistic personality disorder. And I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much a description of demons. And yeah, that's pretty much a description of communists.
Yeah.
But I think that the reason I'm going into that is because they easily perceive any injury whatsoever. And here, that's one of the things that we saw with the rioting and things like that. It was all perceived. There's a lot of this stuff wasn't even real, or there wasn't, if you looked at the actual facts of cases which they were rioting over and things like that, they weren't in the right in doing so. But St. Thomas says, so once a person perceives the injury, then he says they try and mete out vindication against the person to cause them to stop hurting us. Right. So when we get angry, someone hurts us, we hurt them in order to not hurt us. And he says that's the structure of anger. And I think that's what we're actually saying. So on the side of the demons, when we rise up in prayer, that means that God will answer their prayers. I mean, one of the beauties of being an exorcist is you literally see the effect of your prayers. When you ask God the Father, punish him for doing X, you immediately see God physically punishing this demon for what he's actually doing. So there's a certain sense in which you realize God is right there. He's listening to everything that you say. You just have to be very persistent. But the demons know that if you are praying, that means that what they are working towards will get stripped from them. And that's why they get so angry. And I think that's one of the things that you actually, and they get really irritated just by virtue of the fact that you're even fighting against them. Their basic attitude is you should just step aside and I should get what I want. Yep. Which I'm sure sounds very familiar out there.
Yeah, sit down and shut up is what I've been saying.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. And that's what demons like to do. They like to bully, but they are typical bullies, just like these other people are. Once you rise up against them, they're basically cowards and they flee, right? So, but I think that, this is one of the things I mentioned too, that, you know, certain people within our culture have debilitated the police to where they can't function, so they can't subdue people in a rightly ordered fashion in order to establish law and peace and order. And that's exactly what the demon's trying to do, is actually try to debilitate you or set up a situation where you feel you can't go after them because what you're fighting against seems almost insurmountable. And so that's because a lot of times people who are possessed will say, Father, I can't do this. I can't fight this. You know, I can't make it to the end. And my answer is always the same. No, you can't. But with God, you can. And that's the thing that the demons constantly just shift your focus away from God and onto your troubles, the magnitude of them and things of that, rather than keeping your focus on him and doing what you need to do to actually win the battle. So I think that's my concern, is that a lot of people, I saw this at least for the first couple of days after it looked like Joe Biden was going to win. A lot of the people on the right just got demoralized. It was like they deflated and they almost gave up, like right off the bat. So, and you know, if I may make the comparison, it's a bit of a long comparison, but bear with me. This whole situation with Trump reminds me very much like the the situation that Joan of Arc suffered in her life. So one of the things that I learned in dealing with Satan in a particular case is that when he is the demon of delay, now this is very interesting, when he delays things, he does so in order to slow things down so that other things can be put in place, because his goal is to block the process. So he's a demon of delay. His nemesis when it comes to demon of delay, when he's a demon of delay, is Joan of Arc. Now, obviously, Our Lady's always his nemesis in a variety of different ways, but when it comes to when he delays things, it's Saint Joan of Arc. So if you go back and read like the rehabilitation trials, or you can read Mark Twain's book on Joan of Arc, which is actually so close to the rehabilitation trials, it's almost, you might as well just read that because it flows very well. One of the things that you see is time and time again, when Saint Joan of Arc was trying to accomplish something, there would be people around them that would delay everything. So there's, and I even beat out of him one time, are you the one that, delayed this and stopped this and that? And he basically said, yeah, he was the one using these people to cause these delays. And the ultimate reason was because his hope was then the English could move into the proper places or what have you, get their armies where they needed to, so that the French would be defeated. So there's that delay now in the election, which I find, when I first saw that, I'm just like, because I deal with this as an exorcist all the time, where demons delay your work or put up these blockages so that you can't get things done. Another thing that I find very fascinating is that in the life of Joan of Arc, they asked her, are you afraid of anything? And she said, treason, which I found very interesting. The bishop who basically, tried her illegitimately, put her to death, and then made sure none of her relics or anything was ever available. His sin essentially was treason through ambition. He sold out his own country through the ambition because he wanted a bigger bishopric. And so you're seeing this kind of thing even in our own culture, where certain people in positions of power are very, very ambitious. And from that arises a certain treason because they want to attain certain things and they're willing to sell out the country in order to attain it. France was occupied by the English. We're occupied by the deep state. I mean, that's basically what we're dealing with.
Right.
And the English thought that they had a right to rule over France. And so do the elite. And so do the communists. They think they have a right to rule. So there's the parallels in the life of St. Joan of Arc are pretty stark. At the end, when she was being tried, Joan was essentially alone. She felt alone. There's even times when you read her biography that she was actually, even between battles, she would feel very much alone, because essentially, I always tell people, it's pretty bad when it takes a woman to man up the French, right? So, but to go to war. But the point being is that she was alone, and now we've got a situation where it looks like Trump is alone. So even those who appear to be with her during her life were very often the ones delaying things and sabotaging things and trying to derail it. And you actually see that even with Trump throughout the course of his presidency, and even now, there's the people that should be supporting him are the ones that are derailing it. The deep state wants to impose an alternative form of government. That's exactly what the English wanted to do. They wanted to basically maintain and expand their control over France. St. Joan was sold out by a Frenchman. Trump was very often sold out by the same people in his party. Just as the bishop put St. Joan in jail and disposed of her relics, the deep state will be extraordinarily vindictive. I predicted this a week ago. I said, if these people actually win, the retaliation is going to be diabolic in nature. It's going to be brutal. And we're already seeing that with some of the statements made by one of the congresswomen, that, they should start keeping track of these, making lists of people and this and that. These people are out for blood now.
The chilling effect.
There's a certain yeah, it has exactly. So the point being is that it's, when you look at the life of St. Joan of Arc, very often during even the battles, when she would be in battle, she might be back a little bit in the, very often she was the one at the forefront, but sometimes she would be back a little bit in the ranks, but then the guys would start like not advancing as quickly as they should. And then she would go up to the front and start forging forward. And so in a similar fashion, And so she would encourage them to keep fighting forward, keep going forward. I tell people, look, now is not the time to cower. Now is not the time to just give up and say, okay, we can't do anything. It's true that we can't really do too much on the external political level. That is true. And that's probably not our place, most of us. Especially as priests, we're not supposed to be doing that. But at least in relationship with the laity, there's only certain things that they can do in the public sector, given their state in life. Now, some can do a lot, some can't. But what this means is that now is the time to be like Saint Joan of Arc. That is, we have to make the final push. And what this means is that it's not just a matter of abandoning doing anything. Because I even saw this. People stopped praying. Some people actually stopped praying. It's like, oh, well, there's no point. It's just it looks like the election's already been decided and things of that sort. I just tell them, look, now is the time to start fighting. Now is the time to buckle down in prayer. Now is the time to basically man up. And if you're a woman, it's time to become a strong woman. It's time to start praying, fasting, doing those things we need necessary, because in a certain sense, I've talked to people who are very high level in our government, that literally work at the highest levels in some of the parts of Washington. And they have told me that the deep state is so pervasive. It's so extensive and has gotten so much power over the last 30 to 40 years that it's unlikely that even Trump could get the thing rooted out, at least in one term. And so, but what that tells us is, okay, that just looks like it did with the English when it looked like when Joan couldn't, or the French couldn't conquer them. Joan would actually literally start climbing the walls of the castle in order to storm it. I mean, she would literally start doing those things. That's how she got injured once. So the point being is that we can't sit and let this thing pass us by and do
Amen.
Nothing. Yeah, there's only one person that can change this thing. I mean, it is insurmountable on the side of man. It is not insurmountable on the side of God, and He can still deliver us from, 4 years of brutal, oppressiveness. Because that's what's actually coming. And retaliation, things of that sort. He can deliver it from us, but we have to be willing to do our part if we expect Him to do His part.
I'm so glad to hear you talking like this, Father, because I didn't confer with you before I wrote this, and actually Doug fed me this line. He helped me recall about Emperor or Admiral Yamamoto of Japan after they bombed Pearl Harbor. And the classic quote is, "I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and filled him with terrible resolve." And I have that right now, and I am doing whatever I can. I know you do too, Doug. I know you do, Father. But we're doing everything we can to say, and you're talking about Joan of Arc. I always tell the women, I love the expression "Joan up." You said "man up." It's Joan up. And let's get out of the fetal position, okay? And let's do what we can do. With man, it's impossible. With God, all things are possible, okay? And so what are we called to do right now? We're called to get strong in God's grace.
That's right.
Yeah. And that's the force that will be reckoned with, because, you can think of all kinds of images, but the most classic is probably David and Goliath, All he had was a sling and a stone, right? But with God, you can have this insurmountable force coming at you. And you pull out your rosary and you can say, "I like the odds," God's God is stronger than the devil.
The other thing is that the people on the other side are taking this as a spiritual warfare. Look at I'm sure you've read the stories about the witches actually doing witchcraft, where they're cursing Trump, trying to stop the actual. That, Father.
We've been playing the St. Patrick Larica prayer every time they're doing it.
Yeah, I'm going to make some suggestions about what people can do but it basically means that the demons are inciting people to do things to affect, so that he can be empowered to affect the outcome of the election. Right. Because ultimately he wants his country communist. And there is a reason why our Lord chose Our Lady to be the one to counter communism, because its psychology is entirely diabolic. This is why she was the one chosen by God to be the one to ultimately undo it. This is why we have to ultimately go to her, which I'll make some suggestions about some prayers here in a little bit. But she's the one that's going to be the one that God's going to use as the instrument to crush this. Let's not forget, the United States is under the patronage of the Immaculate Conception.
Yay. Yes.
We should be fleeing to her and say, take back your country.
That's right.
Father, is it I mean, very simply put, it sounds like it's a safe